Well, welcome to Stakeholder Value Application. The objective of this lesson is to apply the stakeholder value concepts to your particular organization. Specifically, you'll identify the key stakeholder groups and subgroups for each of the 6 stakeholder categories. Then, their requirements for each of those stakeholder groups. Then you'll identify the listening and learning methods for each group and subgroup, and develop empathy profiles for each of the stakeholder groups. Once you've done all that, you'll then develop a stakeholder systems diagram to better understand the stakeholders and their interrelationships. The first step is to develop a map of your stakeholder groups and get them on the table and understand them. You begin by identifying who the customers are, who are the primary users, the beneficiaries of your products and services, etc. And then who works to produce those products and services and support for the customers. Then you identify who works with you or provides products and services that help you operate, and who's providing the resources. Who are the investors, the donors, or the taxpayers? And what communities do you operate in, and what aspects of society have a stake in your operations and your products? And finally, what aspects of the natural environment are impacted by your operations and products? So for example, your customers might be the users of products and services. For healthcare, they might be patients and different categories of patients, or for education, they might be students and the different categories of students. For more on how to think about customers and segment them, and including customers that participate in the creation of products or services, which can get complicated, refer to Chapter 2 in the Recreate book. Some people like to use small sticky notes when doing this exercise to identify stakeholders so that they can make changes along the way as the map develops and when they get feedback. If you're working in a group, you may want to do this on a big whiteboard. You could map out this framework on the whiteboard and use larger Post-it notes. And that way, everybody participating can see the map as it develops along the way. Once you understand the customers and you've got those segments identified, the next step is to segment the workforce and understand the different types of workers you have, which could include production workers, the administration and staff, frontline customer service workers, research and design staff and workers. The idea here is to segment these by their differing needs, wants, and desires. So you want to create workforce groups, not just based upon the different functions, but based upon the fact that they have differing needs in these different groups. So more is not always better in this case. You may have some very large categories and that's all you need, or you may have some specific areas that have very different needs than other employees. So identify the different segments based upon their needs, not on some function that they have, but often the functions will help you think about the different types of needs. Suppliers and partners. You may have suppliers and partners that provide materials and components for your products and services. Some may be an integral part of production and actually working side by side with you. And there may be some professional services that you use and things like that. So identify the different types of suppliers. And the idea here is not to identify every unique supplier, but the groups or segments based upon their overall needs, not their specific needs. So some organizations have thousands of suppliers, and that's not helpful. And the fact that they have very specific, unique individual requirements is not going to be helpful either to designing overall processes and performance for the organization. So you're going to want to group them into areas where you can measure different part requirements that they have. The investors come in a wide variety as well. They may be stockholders, and there are different types of stockholders, of course, and there may be private equity or owners, and they could even be lenders. If it's a nonprofit, they might be donors that are providing resources, and of course, the expected return is for donors is the most hungry children fed, that sort of thing, as opposed to profit. And taxpayers for government organizations provide resources, and they're expecting the best service for the least amount of tax burden. Society might include the local communities near some of your facilities and members of society in general who use your product or are infected by your product and operations. And the natural environment will have multiple groups supporting it and or advocating for it. And these other stakeholder groups often make decisions based upon the natural environment. But one way to segment the natural environment based upon your organization is how you affect the different parts of the environment. For example, how does your organization affect the air and the atmosphere? What's your carbon footprint? That sort of thing. How does your organization affect plants and agriculture and or use plants and agriculture in the making of your products and services? How does it affect the wildlife and or use wildlife, water usage, and land usage? These are the types of things that you could use as a starting point to understand the environmental dimensions and stakeholders. And from these often have advocacy groups that are different than the other stakeholder groups that have requirements and are putting pressure on you. So you may then move to identifying the different groups. Once you've done that and got to go and understand what the task is, download the stakeholder map. And you may want to make several copies of this just so you have them handy, because you may want to develop several versions. And then identify the stakeholder groups and subgroups and just get started and get your first draft down. Then present that to your colleagues and maybe your boss and your subordinates and get their feedback, and then incorporate that feedback in iterative rounds to further develop and refine the stakeholder map. Once you've done that, you're going to be ready to identify the needs and requirements for the different groups that you've identified. So to identify these groups, you're going to want to download this worksheet and make copies. And you start with the stakeholder segment or group and do these one at a time and identify what does the stakeholder segment want, what influences their decisions to purchase maybe or to come to work for you, what influences the decision to come back and buy more from you or to stay if they're an employee. What influences their decision to refer your company to other customers or other potential workforce workers. So you'll take this and you'll do this for each one. You'll identify another stakeholder segment and then do the same process again. And so you're probably going to need multiple pages, enough rows for all the stakeholder segments that you identified in the stakeholder map in the previous activity. So examples might include you start with one of your customer segments and then identify the different requirements they have. It may include particular features and functions on a menu. So the offer, what you offer in features and functions may be a requirement to buy from you. The appearance of the products or services or your facilities, the amount of defects that your products have. Maybe the durability and reliability is important to this particular product. And maybe fast delivery is critical, or the responsiveness of your customer service. These are just examples of things you might consider that customers often want and are part of the requirements that you identify. Of course, you're going to start with what you already know about the customers. And then as this unfolds and you do other activities, you'll come back to this and further develop this and refine it based upon data from the customers. So start with what you know and then further refine and development as you go. Workforce segments, they often want things like training and development so that they can advance in their career, pay and benefits, working conditions, maybe the culture that is important to them, and leadership and mentoring. These are just examples of things the workforce might have from a requirements perspective. Suppliers and partners often want clear expectations, timely payment of invoices, responsive to issues and challenges, things like that. And so the specific requirements are going to change and will be determined by your particular stakeholder groups. These are just examples to get you thinking. Same way with investors. Often there's an expected return on their investment for a reasonable amount of risk. And if you're a donor, they're often looking for the most impact for their donor dollar, most hungry children fed, etc. And same with taxpayers. They're looking for the most best government services they can get for the least amount of tax burden. Society and community are often looking for jobs and economic flow of dollars in the community and the local economy at the big perspective. They're also want products and operations in their area to be safe and not endanger the citizens and the overall well-being of citizens. From a natural environment, it could be the carbon footprint, energy sources used and choices made, energy usage and efficiency, waste and recycling, those sorts of things. And again, these will come from not only studying the natural environment and your impact on it, but also what the other stakeholder groups and potentially advocacy groups are telling you are the requirements for the natural environment. So to do your own, complete your own worksheets, download the requirements worksheet and make multiple copies. And then identify the requirements for each of the stakeholder groups that are on your empathy map. And then take that around and get your colleagues to look at it, your boss, your subordinates, and get their feedback and incorporate that back into the revised version. This will be a living document. It's really never completed because stakeholder requirements often change over time. And so you're going to want to get going with the best data you can and then further develop it and further refine it along the way. So once you've got the stakeholder groups identified and the requirements based upon your current knowledge and your colleagues' current knowledge and information, you're ready to identify the listening and learning methods that you need to further identify and understand the requirements. So taking the listening and learning methods worksheet, you're first going to identify the listening method, which in this case would be a survey, and then the stakeholder group, the customers, and how often this is conducted, maybe annually, and who uses this, the marketing department, maybe research and development, and what do they use it for? Might be product development. These are just an example. And you do that for all the different methods for the different stakeholder groups. So for customers, you may also monitor purchase patterns monthly, analyze those, and compare actual behavior, purchase patterns to the perceptions they told you about in the survey, and use both to help inform the marketing efforts and research and development for different products. Repeat business, again, another behavioral metric. Referral business, you may do these continuously and use those for continuous improvement of products and services and or marketing. Media and analysts may give you the insights into investors. You may have a monthly meeting or a monthly analysis of that. The leadership team may be the user for strategy development and continued refinement. Same with regulations and monitoring regulatory environment for suppliers and partners and your operations. And there's a whole variety of methods that you can use. Focus groups, to one-on-one interactions to better understand the workforce, to complaints to understand all kinds of stakeholder groups, including the workforce. Social media is becoming an important place to gather information and what people are saying about your organization and your products and services. And the empathy maps that we talked about in the last section, we're going to talk about again. And finally, there's activist groups that are often putting pressure on and identifying different type requirements that they have, and often advocating for stakeholder groups that may or may not have a voice or one that you're paying attention to. So it's important to identify the user and the uses of each one of these methods, because all of these methods potentially individually are good, but each method requires resources. And so you want to make sure that the information that you're getting from these methods is used, and the benefits of collecting that information are worth the cost, because there's no free lunch. Every one of these costs. And so you want to choose the ones that are going to give you the best information so that you can use it for some purpose, whether it's product development or organization improvement, that will result in a benefit that's worth the time and money and effort to go collect this data. So to complete your own methods worksheet, download the listening methods worksheet and populate it with the different methods, both the ones you're currently using and ones that you're potentially planning on using, and fill out everything, how often you would use it, who would use it, and for what purpose. And you may want to go out and take this to the different users and talk to them about it. So talk to your colleagues, boss, subordinates, but also look at who you've identified as the users and talk to them about how they use the information, what information they need, what information they currently have. So you may want to expand your scope on this to include talking to those different user groups and help you make a more complete diagram. Incorporate that all back into the worksheet, and you're ready to move on. You can start using one of these tools now. The empathy map is a low-tech tool, and you can take it and use it and begin having conversations now. In fact, you could use it to talk to the users of the data that you're looking at in the previous activity with the different methods, and take the empathy profile and talk to them about their experiences in using the different data sources that they already have. And the first thing, you start with what do they see and what do they hear? And so what kind of data are they looking at? What format does it come in? Things like that. What do they think about what they're seeing and what they're hearing? And how do they feel about that? And how are those things affecting what they say and do? At the same time that you're identifying these fundamental pieces, you also want to capture their fears and the challenges that they face. And on the upside, what are their aspirations and goals? What are their needs, wants, and desires, and what are they trying to accomplish? Now, every time you interview somebody, you often will hear things that may not fit neatly into any one of these other boxes. And so there's this wildcard box in the lower right-hand corner where you can capture any of the other issues that aren't previously identified. So when you're doing this, you want to begin by asking them, pick a particular context to help frame their thinking, and use that frame throughout the interview to talk to them. So in the case of the listening and learning methods and the users of those, you may talk about different listening and learning methods and frame the conversation and what they're using that data for, and get them thinking about that. Sometimes you're just asking for a general impression, like the experience of customers with your organization, customer service, or with your products, or things like that. The data will be better and more specific if you can frame it in a way that brings it to life and gets them thinking about a particular tangible situation that they've experienced, and then they can relay what they saw and what they heard and what they thought and felt about that, and ultimately what they said and did. So again, you start with on the left side with the inputs to the individual, what they're seeing and what they're hearing, how they think about that, and how does it make them feel, and how do those two things, their thinking and feeling, combine to affect what they say and what they do. And again, capture their biggest fears and frustrations, and what they may need in order to achieve their goals and succeed. And one question at the end you might ask is, what haven't you asked about or probed on that you should have asked? And just ask an open-ended question and let them talk. Sometimes you'll gain a lot of insights into their needs, wants, and what they're doing by this open-ended question at the end. So download the profile and start filling out. And again, people often use Post-it notes to fill this out. And you're going to want to fill one of these out for each of the stakeholder groups, but actually you take a blank one every time you go talk to a new person in that stakeholder group. So for the customers, you may do this for multiple customers, and you want to take a new stakeholder empathy map or a profile each time and start from scratch and understand that one individual. And then you can come back and bring them all together and aggregate multiple empathy profiles into maybe a consolidated view of, for that profile for that user. So download the empathy profile. You're going to want to make copies of this because you're going to be creating several of them over time. And identify representatives from the key stakeholder group to interview. And I recommend that you take one group and one person and go try this out. And then after your experiences with that, you can add another person and develop your plan over time. Eventually, you can use this to understand more deeply all of your stakeholder groups and where they're coming from. And then bring this back and bounce this off your colleagues, boss, and subordinates. What have you found out? What have you learned? Explain that to your colleagues or your subordinates and get their feedback and reactions to that. and then incorporate that into a revised version. But be careful about incorporating internal perspectives with stakeholder perspectives. Don't corrupt the stakeholder perspective with the internal perspective, but use the internal people to help you interpret, understand, and ask follow-on questions as you go along and develop these empathy maps and profiles. So once you've done all that and you've got all this data and you've thought through this, we never have perfect information, but you're at a point at this time to put together a system map of your stakeholders and their interrelationships. And again, this will be a living document that will further develop over time. And you can really do this at any point in time. You could do this right after you develop your stakeholder map. But I present it here at the end because if you go through these other steps first, you just have a richer understanding of what's going on and the interrelationships, what your stakeholders are experiencing. And so it makes it easier to develop this. And so you start with the customers and understand how they experience your products, your services, interacting with your organization, and identify those interrelationships first. And then work on the suppliers and partners along with the workforce and incorporate that into what their experiences are like trying to develop and deliver those products and services and working with the customers. And then examine, the investor perspective of providing resources and the benefits that they're getting from that, and their role in putting money back in and how they make decisions on whether to reinvest money or to extract the excess profits, and whether to give additional donor dollars to do even more good work if you're a nonprofit. And finally, incorporate in the societal and communal aspects. And again, your stakeholders, the other stakeholders, are members of society and community and often have a perspective on this as well. And so we present this as kind of this separate group, but it's often these people are your other stakeholders are part of this group. And then there's additional people that are part of society and community that are not in one of the other stakeholder groups. So you're going to want to go outside as well. And finally, the natural environment. And so this is just a starting point, a generic systems perspective on the big stakeholder groups. The one you develop is going to be specific to your particular stakeholder groups and your particular stakeholders and segments. So you're going to want to get as specific as possible. You may need a whiteboard and a bigger format to do this. We provide a blank sheet to capture this, but again, you may want to use Post-it notes and begin with that and look at interrelationships and develop this over time. It takes a while to figure this out and get the flow and understand the interconnections. But once you do, you can start identifying leverage points and really develop strategies and systems and processes and metrics that will help you with those leverage points and create the most value that you can. So to complete this, download the worksheet as always, and begin developing it and draw the pieces and parts and then the relationships with the arrows between them and how the flows work. And then present that to your colleagues, your boss, your subordinates. Get input, get feedback. You may even go back out to the stakeholder groups and talk to them about what you've learned and what you're concluding from it and how you see how the system interacts with each stakeholder group, and get their feedback and incorporate that into the revised version. And once you're done with that, you're ready to move on and assess stakeholder value for your organization. We'll see you in the next module.